If you watched my last video, you heard me talk about intentionality. But today I want to give you some real tools, okay? Something real, something you can actually do and you can get started with today. And something that can really help you to begin to shift your grief. Because understanding your grief is important, but at some point, healing begins when you take action. So, welcome back to Next Level Pets, your home for all things related to living the best life you can with your pets, and also what to do once they've left our lives. So, if you have ever loved an animal with your whole heart, then you belong here. And if my content resonates with you, please share it with any animal lover you know, and please like and subscribe. And I'd love for you to leave a comment and hear more about your experiences with your pets and how you relate to these videos. So in the Forever in Our Hearts program that I created, I talk about something I call EPA, education, purpose, and action. And those are kind of like the three pillars that I guide people through, and in that order. That's also the order in which I built the program. So first, I had to educate myself on everything I could find, everything I could find out about pet loss and grief and healing. Then once I found a reason, a purpose to actually want to heal, I was ready to take action. So let me break that down just a little bit further for you. So when all of this started, after losing my cat Dublin and my mother within just a few months of each other, I had no idea what to do or what to expect. I didn't understand loss, and I definitely didn't understand that I was experiencing different types of grief at the same time. So during that phase where I was, researching and trying to make sense of everything, that's when I slowly started to find answers. That's when I began to understand why I was hurting so much and felt like I wasn't moving forward at all. And one of the biggest things that I learned, something that nobody told me, not even a therapist that I was seeing at the time, was that I was experiencing two completely different types of grief simultaneously. And that realization was the first moment of relief that I'd had in months, because I could finally start to identify what I was feeling, and I could begin to give it some form of structure. I could give it language, just to have names for things that were previously nameless. And for me, that just helped so much. It helped me organize my grief in a way that didn't feel so overwhelming, just so cloudy and so muddy. And it was during that process that I found something else. I found purpose. At first, I just wanted to feel better, but I realized it wasn't just about not feeling bad. I didn't want to simply stop being sad. I really wanted to start living again. I wanted to, experience what it was to feel joy again, to feel motivated, to feel inspired. Because Dublin gave me all of that. He brought me so much joy, so many smiles, so much laughter, and so much comfort. And I really, really wanted to honor that. I wanted to live in a way that reflected the love that he gave me. I wanted to make him proud. And that awareness kind of changed everything for me because now and at that point, the actions I was taking, they weren't just things I should do. They were meanings, they were actions with meaning. They were actions with purpose. So, now before I share these tools, I do want to say something important, okay? There is no specific timeline for when taking action is right for you. If you've just lost your pet, don't rush this. Give yourself space, give yourself time. Sometimes you need a few days or a week or weeks or more just to be in that space, to let your body, your mind, and your heart process what just happened, and that's okay. Now, there's no specific time frame for when taking action is right for you. Sometimes when people have contacted me right after losing a pet, or even if I'm in communication with them before their pet transitions, I usually suggest not to rush into taking action, for whatever that means for you. Give yourself space in the immediate days after you've said goodbye. Maybe a few weeks. It's whatever feels most comfortable, for your process and where you're at. In most cases, you will need a few days or a week to just simply grieve. It hurts. And sometimes you need to just let your body, your mind, and your heart be still in that space before you're ready to even contemplating taking any kind of step forward. So the first tool I want to share is something I call the golden list. You may have heard me mention that before, and this is something you can begin in the early part of your healing or whenever you feel ready to take that first step forward. And the golden list is pretty simple. It's a list of, 3, 5, 10 memories of your pet, and they can be anything. It can be the first time you saw them or the first time you brought them home, maybe the first time they felt comfortable in your new space and were playing. Maybe something funny they would always do, something mischievous they did once, maybe a routine you shared, maybe the way they greeted you when you got home, or the way they looked at you, maybe some behavior they did around feeding time or when you would play or go on a walk. It's completely up to you. But what matters is this: these are moments that you need to choose that represent the love and the bond you shared. Think of it like a mental photo album, of all your favorite moments together. And these aren't just memories; they are anchors to your love and the life you shared. Okay, and over time, you may want to add more to that list as more memories come back to you. Now, here's where the action comes in. Okay, you write them down on paper, in a journal. And I encourage my clients to have a dedicated journal for this, or just make it something or somewhere intentional for this purpose alone. And give the list a title. You can use the golden list, or our story, or something like the adventures of Patrick in Dublin, or anything that's personal to you and your pet. Now, when the waves of grief hit you, when you walk into a room and you feel the weight of the absence, or maybe you look at where they used to sleep, or anything, when the grief hits, you go to the list and you read it out loud, and you can even write something at the top like, and read this before you read the list, this is our true story. I love you, I miss you, and I choose to remember you with love and gratitude. And then you read your list, you go through those memories, and you can do this as many times as you need throughout your day or week. There's no rules here, okay? Just action and just love. So, because when your mind and your body are trying to make sense of this new reality, it's very easy to get stuck, just circling around the same painful thoughts, maybe just only thinking of the last few days you had together. It's almost like time stands still. But when you use the golden list, you are doing something very powerful. Okay, you are taking action at every level. Okay, you are creating a space for your love. You're choosing what you focus on. Okay, you're reinforcing meaningful memories, and you're actively engaging with your healing. By taking action with the golden list, and by action I mean all of it. The first action of dedicating a specific and sacred space to write your list on. Then the action of choosing to remember the moments of love and joy. Okay, then taking the action to write those down. And then taking the action to read them and say them, to your grief. And by saying these memories to your pain, it can be transformative, wildly transformative. You're not avoiding your grief, you're meeting it. You're meeting it through love, through remembrance, and through connection. And in doing that, you begin to shift something, in your body, in your mind, and in your overall emotional state. You're not only affirming your grief instead of, running away from it, but you're doing so in a way of love and remembrance, of reverence and celebration and gratitude, and by taking action to create this legacy of you and your pet, you are consciously aligning the true story of you and your pet instead of the grief narrative that is probably, currently renting space in your head. You're taking action to rewrite neural pathways in your mind and your body. You are calming your nervous system. You are reminding yourself of the full story and not just the loss. And in this way, you're beginning to create new patterns and new perspectives. You are helping to shape your new reality instead of being shaped by it. So you are choosing to move forward with love and not just suffering. And that takes courage. It takes real courage. What's the phrase? Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's taking action while you're still in the fear. Okay, so the second action I encourage people to take is writing a farewell letter to their pet. And this isn't something you do just once. It's something you can continually return to. And I want to say this clearly. It does not have to be perfect. The first one, there's nothing perfect about grief. There's no right way to do this. So it's important not to feel like pressure to get it right. It doesn't have to be, this opus, it doesn't have to be a masterpiece. Now, when I say it doesn't have to be perfect on the first attempt, it's because there's nothing perfect about grief or healing. There are no absolutes. There are peaks and valleys, there are ebbs and flows. But just by getting something down, you are taking action. You are taking a huge step towards accepting and honoring your loss. Like the golden list, you are taking control of your grief and reinforcing your pain with love and remembrance. So just start, write something, just write anything. When I was learning about this, the writing through, recovery writing, I would see suggestions like just write about your grief, but no one really explained how. So I've created a sample farewell letter with prompts to kind of help guide you through it. And you can find a free download of the sample farewell letter on my website if you'd like, more guidance and structure with that. And so what I encourage people to do is also to write a new letter every month for as long as they need, or every week, whatever's right for you. Because something really beautiful happens, okay? These letters will change. At first they're full of pain, confusion, apology, hopelessness, all of it, guilt. But over time, they will begin to shift. They will become lighter, they'll become more reflective and more grounded in love, more grounded in the full, true story. Eventually, a lot of my clients tell me that they start sharing what they've been doing, how they've been living, how they're continuing to move forward. And that these letters become kind of a dialogue, this relationship that continues. It becomes a way to process, to reflect, also to track your healing. That's a big part. And to stay connected. By taking the fear away about facing your loss, it becomes more manageable. And by approaching with love and gratitude, it becomes inspirational. You can also use these letters, really, like I said, to see where you're at in your healing. You will be able to, kind of look back and see where you were 3-6 months ago to where you are now and how you're relating to your loss. And one thing I like to suggest when someone is ready is also to include specific actions they've taken to honor their pet. Okay, so these letters become not just expression, but also accountability. And honestly, one of my favorite things people share with me is how different their first letter sounds compared to ones they write months later or a year later, because the difference that you'll see is healing. So I hope these suggestions can give you something real, something that you can actually do, something that you can reflect on, because grief doesn't have to be something you just sit in. It can be something you work with. And if you try this, I would truly love to hear your experiences. So if you or someone you know is going through this and wants a more structured path to healing, feel free to visit my website at nextlevelpets.love, and I'd love to see you inside of the program and, hopefully meet you in a Zoom session. Okay? Thank you so much.